serving you a dose of wisdom and humor with a dash of radiance. Welcome to Biscuits and Sunshine with your hosts, Callie and Landra.
Hey y'all, pull up a seat at our table for the next serving of Biscuits and Sunshine. I'm Callie.
And I'm Landra. We're delighted you're here with us. We're recording this from Distance 4 Audio Studios in Athens, Greece. Welcome to episode 25. Ikosi pende. Bame. Let's go.
I'm so excited to touch on this topic today because I think it's something that everyone's thinking about. And for me, it's always really eye-opening when we're able to mark the passage of time in a very real way. It's a random Monday. Chances are you don't exactly remember what you were doing 3 years ago. I can't remember what I was doing last week on a Monday, but I can tell you that 5 years ago, I remember it very well. We are dedicating today's episode to all that's happened in the past 5 years post-COVID-19 pandemic. How does 5 years feel like yesterday and still eons ago? I don't get it.
I am with you. When we set out to come up with programming for our future topics, I was like, are you serious? The pandemic was 5 years ago? Like, it felt like a year that we were never going to get out of. And then now looking back, it's like, whoa, personally, and also just in the world, so much has happened. I can't believe it.
I think it really changed how we relate to time.
100%.
So strange to me.
Yeah. And people, I think over and over, were talking about that. Like it was a time warp, whether it was at work, whether it was with families, whether it was with holidays. So I get that. It just, oof. It was a lot.
Yeah, it really was a lot. So 5 years ago, paint us a picture of your life 5 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So 5 years ago, I was living in San Francisco. I was teaching both mindfulness in studios and corporate spaces and some online. And then I also had HR clients. And that was also a mix of going in person and online. And so that was just really bustling. There was a lot going on. I was used to getting out of my house and then coming home. My husband had his music studio somewhere else. So we kind of had this, like, we went off and did our own things and we come home. And yeah, that's kind of where I remember painting the picture before I get into pandemic stuff.
For me, the idea of virtual life was so foreign. I was going to work every day, leaving early in the morning to miss the morning commute, and staying late so I could finish work every day outside the house. After work, I'd have volunteer opportunities. I'd have dinner with friends. I had a very robust life, a very robust social life. And when we started to see the trickling impact of this sort of COVID-19 fear, I couldn't imagine how much life would change.
Yeah. The other thing you were reminding me of is when you said like friends and kind of having a robust life outside of work. Yeah. I was like used to going to routine classes, whether they were at an actual yoga studio. Also, I just reminded myself I was doing some conferences and also working at taking classes and also teaching at a co-working space. So I would, be there and be in community working with other individuals. And I love that so much. Yeah.
I had just moved in with a cousin of mine. I was living in Atlanta. I gave up my apartment because I wanted to buy a house. And I thought, I could save some money by moving in with my cousin. She was a fantastic landlord. And I moved in with her. And then she decided to move like a month later.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I remember very distinctly, like the first day I was working from home. I cooked this big meal. I was like, this is going to be great. The reality hit me of, maybe this won't be so great. But I think at that point, I was still excited about being able to like live at home, be home, enjoy this home space that I had created.
And be in your comfies.
Yeah, just wild. I think back on those first few weeks of March 2020, and I really can't begin to believe we were staring down the barrel of such a looming global upheaval. By the time 2020 came around, from a career perspective for me, I was deep into crisis and reputation management. We were really carefully tracking sort of corporate response to the pandemic and the decisions that companies were making, the statements they were putting out. And I think even, let's say February, we could see the writing on the wall that this was going to be something. We just didn't know exactly what it was going to be. I remember like in the office, we were saying, are we gonna go remote? Remember this, like, 2 weeks to stop the spread? This idea that if we all went home and like isolated ourselves for 2 weeks, then everything would be fine and we would come back together and it would be no big deal.
I don't even remember that.
I guess it's because we were so focused on the communication around the pandemic that it just stood out to me. When the company I was with, when they issued the decision to say, we're going to go home for 2 weeks, it was a Thursday. That Friday, our last day in the office, I went around collecting money so we could have a big pizza party before the great distancing, as I called it. But even then, I didn't know how great of a distance we would find ourselves at.
6 feet.
Yeah.
Always 6 feet apart from.
Isn't it crazy we still have stickers on the streets?
Oh,
here?
I know. I see that.
Or in restaurants.
Yep.
Like,
yeah.
wow.
Here in Athens, I've seen it back in the U.S. in some places. Yeah. Old signs about washing your hands.
Remnants of times gone by.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
I remember when I would walk around the city, I was taking photos to kind of almost like document the time, just knowing and hoping that we would get past this and look back and go, wow, remember this? Yeah, you were, when you were speaking about the timeline, February, March, it got me rethinking. I think I mentioned in a previous episode, 2020 was my year that I was like, I'm going to thrive this year. And like, little did I know, it's more about surviving. So that I remember. And then we always started this tradition, Alex and I, of going to DC to visit family. So we hopped on a plane, like no big deal. Yeah, we kind of were hearing a little bit about the pandemic. I don't think it was that top of mind at that moment in time. Like we were kind of hearing about it, but it didn't seem like big alarms kind of, being sounded. I came back and I think it might have been end of February, early March, somewhere around there. And this was a big security conference. I was leading a little breakout session around mindfulness and meditation. And at a break, the woman that owns a company and I were standing and talking. And she's like, I think this is going to be huge. And she also had a background in the medical field. And she's like, yeah, I don't know, something big's coming. And in my head, it's kind of like, really? And then, yeah, I think it was a matter of a couple of weeks. And then, yeah, like you said, like distancing. I mean, even I remember now, it's funny how, you think about it. And then now as we're really talking and diving into it, these images are coming back into my mind of that time. And I remember as I still was teaching in studio and everybody was like, I don't know, what do we do, right? There was a lot of like less hugging, less like handshaking. I would put my hand over my heart and be like, welcome. And we would kind of set students up so we had space between us. And then, yeah, so that was really interesting. And then eventually we did just go fully online.
The week that we went remote, I remember the following weekend seeing colleagues on social media out partying for St. Patrick's Day. And I just thought, how reckless can you be? These major decisions are being made at companies across the world, and you're out at a club because you think partying for St. Patrick's Day is more important. It really got to me. And granted, I might have been more focused on the facts and paid more attention because my great-grandmother died during the flu epidemic of 1918. My grandmother never knew her mother. She died a few weeks after my grandmother was born. And so it was something we always spoke about in my house. And so when this all started, we, of course, started thinking about my grandmother and the experience and the impact that the epidemic in 1918 had on her family and her whole life trajectory. And I think we were a little worried. I know we were worried because no one knew exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah. I was thinking too about how the pandemic turned into becoming this really divisive thing, kind of two camps, if you will, whether you're vaccinated or not, whether you're going to wear a mask or not. Like you said, whether you're going to be out and surrounding yourself in big groups or not. And so, yeah, I think it was just human nature to really get triggered by a lot of that. I know for me too, like really, I have asthma. And so that really worried me because whenever I have a full-on asthma attack, it is not pleasant. It's scary. And so I was even thinking about, okay, who am I hanging out with? And like kind of like knowing the lifestyles of different people.
Yeah. Do you trust them?
Yeah. And it wasn't like I want to tell you what to do, but it was like, okay, if you're going to be doing that, like I made the decision, like I cannot be hanging around you. Because it just was like, I was so thinking about protecting my own health. And of course, I could not help but get into judgment because, community is one of my biggest core values. And so I really got in that place of like, oh my God, okay, if you're not just doing it for yourself, do it for your neighbor, do it for the immune compromised person, do it for, thinking about my dad who had a lot of health issues at the time. I was like, God forbid, if this man has been through so much in his life, COVID cannot be the thing that takes him out, So it became like you were saying about your great grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it being personal. I felt that too from my parents.
To your point, it wasn't about, I'm going to tell you what to do, but it was about, I need all the facts so that I can make the best decision for myself and for my family.
Yeah.
If you're out doing X, Y, or Z, I just need to know so I can make a choice. It's sort of why the truth is important across the board in every aspect. Give me the information and let me make the choice based on the reality of the situation.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we were faced with in COVID.
Yeah.
This division that grew, that was already there, that started to grow.
Yeah.
And I don't think we realized how deep that divide between us would get.
Yeah. And I think about that, really, it was to your point, it was nothing new, but things just got really magnified and really heated. And it became very personal because it literally was life and death for a large population. And what, of course, the news media was feeding us too, right? Just continue to fuel that fire, to fuel those fears.
Yeah, you started to see facts and science, which we've relied on for a long time, not really matter at all. It just started you thinking more deeply about what foundational things do I hold important, and do my closest people also share that?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? That was definitely, I think, a big kind of aha. In a way, it just realized, I know the world is not always a sunny place and things are not always perfect, but it was all those little things that are really hard about the world that can feel whether you want to call it evil or wrong or bad, it just you were just faced with it. There was no turning away from it. It was just in your face. And so I think that's for sure what made it a big challenge. But then when I also think about the world needing to shift, needing to evolve and become a better place, we need to look at these things. And it's uncomfortable, but I think, I don't know if it would be a silver lining, but something that I think it's more what did we learn? If that taught us anything, I think for me, it's how do you hold space to be with the discomfort and not let it take you down?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things we can call it a new habit or something like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I started to realize during the pandemic was just because it felt like the world was going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
Didn't mean that I shouldn't celebrate wins or joys or moments that were really positive. Sometimes I think we are so bombarded with the negative news of the world that we feel like there's so much suffering. How can I be happy? How do I allow myself, how from this place of privilege, how is it right for me to be happy when the world is so awful to so many people? But I think too, life is short. And so you said it, it's not always easy. It's not always positive. So we do have to take the time to celebrate when we can. And that was something I think the pandemic really brought home for me.
Yeah, I so agree with that. That in my experience as well is mindfulness, at the core of really studying it, it was great. Okay, you really believe in mindfulness and study it? Well, okay, let's go. Because it really did kind of force a lot of that, having to hold two things that are true and also feel like opposite energies at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's all the range of emotions, things that we always talk about on this podcast for sure, that really, kind of is being tested. Other challenges for me, the hardest part was not gathering with people, whether, just in community. So I think back to the classes that were just part of my life for so long, yoga classes, being so close to people on a mat all around you, that was a real big change. Missing celebrating birthdays and holidays. I remember our birthdays being in January, that I was oh, wow, I feel so bad for these people that are having pandemic birthdays on Zoom and all these different ways or alternative ways are looking to celebrate, maybe outdoors, even if it's winter. And guess what happened? We looped around and I also had a pandemic birthday online. So that was a real big challenge for me, the people piece, physically being near people. And then, of course, like I mentioned before about parents and older people, And, that was kind of, in a way, now I can chuckle at it because my parents, they were still going out and meeting people, not all the time, but I was like, whoa, 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 and I'm like, oh no, but we have our mask on. And I was like, kind of policing them a little bit. It was like, I felt very much like a role reversal where I'm like, what is up with you guys? And then I realized, just hearing online kind of some funny things about that generation, was kind of like, we've lived through a lot of things. We got this. But yeah, I remember my sister and I were talking and we're like, Mom, Dad, no, please don't go to that. Or like, please, be smart about what you're doing. Do you really need to go to the supermarket for
My
that
brother
one
and I
thing?
were the same way. I would be like, have you heard what your parents are doing lately? They're going to go blah, blah, blah. But I think, too, my parents sort of realized we were taking this very seriously. The loneliness piece of it was a big deal for me. I think one of the things, a silver lining of the pandemic for me, was this realization just how important community was in my life. I had this group of girlfriends from work, my colleagues, every day. I promise you, every single work day at 5 p.m., we would all get into a Zoom room. We would finish our work. We'd have a little chat. If everybody was done, we'd maybe make a drink. Like, it was just this anchor for, I think, for me for sure, but I think for all of us. And then as the pandemic rolled on and my friends started to get different jobs and move away, the impact that had on my life, not being able to gather even virtually with my friends and my colleagues, my quality of life dropped significantly after that. And it really was this forcing factor for me to start to ask what I really wanted, because whatever it was that I had surrounded myself with, it wasn't doing it for me. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't what, if I had the choice of anything in the world, like, it wasn't maybe the things that I would have picked for me. I got really into understanding the human body and nutrition and how food is medicine, because I was so concerned about my mom and dad. I was so concerned about the people who were important to me. It's like, whatever you put into your body, it either fights disease or feeds disease. And this has been something that I've carried with me out of the pandemic. I think that's one of the biggest things. It's just sort of changed my relationship to health, took it out of this very medicine-focused Western understanding. I started pulling in information from a whole new set of like places, Chinese medicine. So my focus was less anyway, it was great for me. I started seeing a functional medicine doctor and got really serious about what I was putting in my body. And I've carried that with me, and I think I'm so much better for it. So yeah, the pandemic was awful in more ways than we could ever imagine. But I do think if we were intentional, we have brought good things out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so many people, like, you even mentioned, like, changing your life, reevaluating, like, what am I doing? We saw people mass exodus out of cities, right? And going to farmlands, and you went across to another country. So did we. But yeah, good for you.
Yeah, it feels good thinking back on it. I think we're hard on ourselves. We don't always recognize our own successes. You
Right.
took something that was life-changing and changed your life for the better
Mm-hmm.
versus, I don't know, staying stuck because of fear or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it just really essentially, if you were listening, it really called you out to be like, this is your one chance. Life is precious. What are you doing with it? It's kind of like that almost, I think a lot of people kind of felt that. Yeah, for me, I'm thinking, what are the things I adopted? I remember just a few friends that too were kind of on the same page about how they felt about, health wise. And so we started instituting neighborhood walks. There were just a few people. I had Isabel and Stephanie, and we would do this individually. We just had a certain day and time. Just as you spoke about earlier about having an anchor, those walks and those talks felt like the same thing. And we started noticing, what time of day was quieter, what coffee shops we could pop into and then take our coffee and go for a walk. And it really deepened those relationships, having that. And it really, I think mental health wise, helped having just the partner outside of, my romantic partner I was living with, to have that, just fresh air and fresh conversation. And, personally, like, no surprise, because I've carried that with me here, I would get out into nature. I had the most beautiful park just up and around near where I lived. And I would joke that it was my backyard, but you go and it was a city kept it up and it was just beautiful. We'd have hummingbirds come through, bees. But I would just really slow down and really start to notice the different textures of the flowers, and bees I no longer became scared of because bees are so regenerative and thinking about how just nature, like the true nature of things. And so that really, I think, deepened my connection that I've carried forward with how I act here and what restores me here. And yeah, I also think too, it was nice to be online and see people I hadn't spoke to in a while because of distance. Everybody then started to make it a priority. Like, how can we connect? Let's set up a Zoom. So that, that there was some beauty there in reconnecting with people online.
One thing about community that the pandemic really taught me is that sometimes when I'm feeling underwhelmed with life or dissatisfied, it just means I miss my friends.
Mm.
Just means I need to reach out and say, hey, you want to grab coffee? Hey, do you want to have dinner? Because it isn't that I am miserable in my life. It's just that I need companionship.
Yeah.
And I spent a bunch of time during the pandemic at my parents' house. A bunch of time. I had this beautiful home I had just bought. And I spent a lot of 2000 and 2021 at my mom and dad's. It was such a blessing. I became acutely aware of how important connection and community were. I recently read this study that 100% backs up how important community and connection are to people, but to women specifically. Researchers from the University of Washington found that COVID lockdowns prematurely aged teenagers' brains by more than 4 years.
Wow.
Like teenage boys during the pandemic were impacted, let's say their brains aged like almost 1.5 years faster than they would have without the pandemic. Girls' brains aged more than 4 times what they would have during the pandemic. So teenage boys tend to find connection through sports and like physical activity. Girls rely on interpersonal relationship for emotional support and sort of self-identity. So when you took that away, the in-person piece, it stressed girls' brains out. So much so that they aged faster during the pandemic. To me, I like when I find research that says, yep, what you think and what you feel. Absolutely. You're totally right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I now know if I feel like something is missing, I just have to reach out and call someone, which was a big key learning for me during the pandemic. Sometimes I think we can go through big things and have these key learnings, but then not put these learnings into practice. And so I'm curious for you, how did what you learned or what you experienced, how did that impact your life moving forward after the pandemic?
That's such a good question. And, I thinking about it, I think maybe there's a few things, but I'm also like, it feels like it, I guess my pandemic experience is unique in the sense that it was like, I experienced it in the US in San Francisco and I experienced it here in Greece. And so it was all a lot of layers upon layers upon layers. So it's a hard one to answer. I mean, I feel like, there's life goes in cycles is what I've been learning on these 50 years on the planet now, is just when you think kind of something has been addressed or learned, like there's no in this like development of ourselves as a human being, there's no like check, got it. Like things come back around again and it's almost like a spiraling up. So things that I thought I had worked on or kind of had gotten over in my own like nervous system and anxiety and worries, no, it got kicked back up again. And there was a new opportunity to apply what I had learned. But I will say I really felt there was a lot of unsettling, even though I was going after these big goals and super exciting to like move, but it was overwhelming because, the pandemic things were still locked down here just as much as they were in San Francisco. But then there's a whole layer of language that I had to get to know and things that felt very foreign to me. And then also just how does things work here? Where do you go for certain things? Where do you buy these things? How do things work? So it just, if I'm taking the learning, I think it's that feel what you feel, give yourself some grace, know that just because you've been through something before doesn't mean it's going to not show up again. But I think it gave me, now that I'm out of it, the confidence to know that I can handle this And I can look back and rely on previous experience, and I can see how far I've come and things that I've learned and be able to apply it, but also not be hard on myself. Because I think there was that too, where I'm like, oh, what? Oh, I should be over this, this anxiety, this unsettlingness. It was a lot of, and, I made the decision to step away from teaching meditation, mindfulness, and movement while I moved here because I knew I needed to heal myself. I knew that I was not grounded and I cannot give to others what I didn't feel in myself. And now, what is this? Last year, 24, so technically 4 years out of the pandemic, I was able to start teaching again. And I feel like I have that, I'm more resourced, that I have that ability to give to others because I myself feel more settled.
I think it's a great acknowledgement that when the world went crazy and things upended, you turned to self-compassion.
Mm.
I think that's a beautiful thing.
It felt like there was no other option.
Mm.
And so, and I still have to remember this over and over again. Compassion is still a core value. It's one that I kind of lump under love. And yeah, it's just interesting. It's so much easier to give to others sometimes than it is to give to myself. Yeah, that's just the learning. So yeah, learned it. And guess what? I'm going to probably learn it again.
May we all have long enough lives to learn and relearn and learn again. For me, the pandemic really brought into focus how limited my time with loved ones really is. On a grand scheme, but also in the short term, I wasn't living in the same city where my parents lived, my brother lived. And I would, leave work on a Friday, roll in on 2 wheels, have all of Saturday to spend time, and then be gone again on Sunday. So even the quality of the time I was spending with them, how good was it? The pandemic forced me to sort of recalculate how I was relating to my own family. Because those are the people that I feel like I had sort of grown to neglect in a way, because I took them for granted. We really, though, when I started spending months and months at my parents' house during the pandemic, we really experienced it together. I mentioned earlier my brother and I collectively worried and shared concerns about my parents' safety. It really brought me closer to my family. My brother and sister-in-law had their last baby during COVID, and because I was working from home, because I was at my parents' house, I sort of forced them to let me make dinner 3 nights a week. So I would take it over to their house and I'd eat with them or just sit and chill with them. And it allowed me to build these beautiful relationships with my brother, deep in that one, my sister-in-law, but also the kids. And I think the strength of those relationships that we built during COVID is really lasting and carrying us through my time living here because we were able to get to know each other. I was seeing them so consistently and for such a long amount of time. It was great. So during this time of sort of profound global separation and loneliness, for me, it was an unparalleled time of connection once I realized that's what I needed. And I'm, I said, still reaping the benefits of that. I also learned how to cook all my favorite foods because we weren't ordering food out because no one knew exactly where the germs were and what would happen.
Oh my God, did you ever wipe down your groceries?
My dad still wears the shirt with the bleach stains because they would leave them outside and he would spray them with bleach and wipe everything down.
Oh my gosh.
We all know bleach just sort of goes everywhere. I was like, oh, it's a COVID shirt. You got to get rid of it.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I was also thinking about all the things people did, sourdough starters, making bread, buying plants, yeah.
Sort of a good return to the slower lifestyle.
Yeah, right? True.
All of these things, scientifically, hobbies, plants, time with family, all of these things just benefit us.
100%.
They don't detract from the lives that we live. One thing for us that absolutely adds to our lives is this podcast. We know, without a shadow of a doubt, you're meant to be here with us, and we love sharing this time with y'all. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for being a part of this growing community. We couldn't be more grateful. Also, a big shout out to Alex at Distance Sport Audio for the technical and sound expertise.
Our hope for you this week is that you recognize how far you've come during the past 5 years and celebrate the little wins you experienced along the way.
If you love what we're serving up, please subscribe and rate us on your favorite streaming platform. Also, leave us a comment. We love to hear from you. We're also active on Instagram. Give us a follow at Biscuits and Sunshine, all spelled out. This is Biscuits and Sunshine with Callie and Landra.